everyone. Sorry, that was my wife shouting me from the other room. So thanks anyone for coming today. Today we are going to do some Slim PHP. We are going to build a project bootstrap so that we can easily create Slim PHP projects really quickly and really easily. Done this a few times before. There's a few options already out there which I will take you through. But for those who don't know about Slim PHP, it is a really good micro framework that helps you basically write really quick, simple, powerful applications and APIs. I've used it now for almost 9 years. It's fantastic. Now on version 4, it's very stable, and it is very, very PSR compliant. And if you don't know what PSRs are, it's just PHP standard recommendations. They're a set of interfaces which define how we should write certain things in PHP so that we can keep consistency between components and across projects. So if we have a look at this quickly, we see that's all we need to do to create a Slim application is use their app factory to create. We can then define a root really easily, which is then passing in a closure or an anonymous function there. And then we just pull out the name and we can write back into the body and return the response and then the app. And what that will do is just say, hello, whatever comes through there. So all in all, it's relatively simple. And I've created a couple of repos for this already. We have got this one here, which I will drop in the chat now. So this is github.com/juststeveking/micro-core. And the idea of this one is it's going to be a collection of components which allows us to create our project really nicely. And it's going to provide some interfaces so that we can use a container a little bit more than what maybe we would do usually, so that we can try to build up a better sense of dependency injection. And then the second repo is going to be our implementation over here. It is very similar in terms of name, and it's just github.com/juststeveking/micro. And what this is, it's going to be a simple to use boilerplate for Slim PHP for APIs. So the idea is we will just have an API by the end of it. I want to have a relatively consistent directory structure. I want to make sure that I'm allowing as much extension where possible. And as you can see, I have been doing some code in here already, and I will walk you through where I am and how I got there as we go through this. But before I go to that, I wanted to take a quick walk through some of the options available. So Slim PHP has got a really good use guide. It goes back from 2, 3, and 4. You can go through all of the different bits of information, and it's got lots of useful stuff in there. So the cookbook, for example, retrieving the current root, enabling cores, uploading files, add-ons. If you go back to version 3, what you'll probably notice is if we scroll down to the cookbook, there's actually quite a few more things going on in the cookbook there. So we could we could follow the instructions on how to get something like Doctrine into Slim quite easily, and just kind of adapt it slightly to how we want it to work for Slim version 4. And if all else fails, there is a relatively active forum. I've been on it for quite a while now. I don't really use it, if I'm completely honest. I joined back in 2017, I believe. So I've not really done much on here, to be honest. I joined and didn't really need to do much. I joined in a few places, but then I found Slack, and Slack is super useful. So if you want to look at options when it comes to Slim PHP and boilerplates, there is the official one. There is Slim PHP Slim Skeleton. Now this one's relatively simple to get up and going. It's a composer create project, slim/slim-skeleton. And from a directory structure perspective, it's very different to what they used to be. So instantly you get in there and you realize you're in something maybe a little bit more domain-driven design approach. So we've got our application over here, which has got some confusing names if you're used to MVC. Then if we come over to the domain, we've got other parts here which we know what a repository is, but we start to get a little bit confused what's going on. And then within infrastructure persistence user, we've got an in-memory user repository going on here. And yeah, it's a good skeleton. It's well written, but it's not aimed at beginners. If you're used to MVC and you aren't used to domain-driven design or going with something like a micro framework, I'd probably recommend against this one for now. Instead, maybe look at something like the one that Rob Allen has created here, which is /acrobat/slim4-empty. And all this is it's a public index.php, and it's just set up for you. It's got the app factory create, registering the minimal middleware that you're going to need, which is the routing middleware, so that you can do route matching, body parsing, so that you can pull things from post requests, I believe, and then they're adding error middleware. And these options we will walk through later. And then it's just declaring one simple route, which is very similar to what we had on the example here. And then we're just running our application. So overall, it's a good place to start if you don't know how to do it just yet. If you're not really too sure from a composer perspective, it hasn't got extra dependencies. If you look at the Slim one, if you come and look at their dependencies, they've got a couple more. They've got PHP DI and monologue. That's just so that you've got logging capabilities and dependency injection. And then if we carry on, we have also got Odan/Slim4 skeleton. Now this one is probably one of the skeletons which has got the best documentation I have seen for a package skeleton. So it's got its own website. It's got Docker availability, Vagrant availability. It's got information on how to get started. The architecture of what it's doing. It follows the action domain responder pattern, which is an alternative to MVC. It covers the basics. It goes into more advanced options. It's got security. It's got OAuth 2 is available. It's got everything basically. If you can think of it, it's probably got it. Now this one's a little bit more complicated, but also straightforward at the same time. It's based off of hexagonal architecture, so everything's bound through the container into interfaces so that things are extremely hot swappable, not just on a PSR basis, but then on an implementation basis also. So it's very good if you want to follow some very strict rules and you want to follow some. The person who's built this, Odan, he's been in the Slim community for such a long time, and he knows a lot about it. So he's definitely a good person to take advice from if you really wanted to dive into it. Lots of different options within here, so how to set a container, settings. If your application your Slim app is bound into the container. Your response factory, everything's literally bounded into the container as you might expect it. And then we've got an alternative one. I've mentioned Chubby PHP before when it comes to micro frameworks, and they do have their own kind of starter, but this is a Slim starter for a pet store using Chubby PHP. And what it does is it gives you a very base you've got Swagger, you've got your Open API definition within here for Open API. Hey, Daryl, thanks for coming. And then if we come to public, it's got its entry route here, which has got, creating a new web server and running it, passing through the server request, and it handles everything for you. Now, this one's maybe a little bit more complicated for some people, but it depends what sort of things you're used to. So if you come to Request Handler API, coming over to CRUD, you've got options within here which, they work. It's just a case of whether it suits your coding style. And so far, none of these are quite what I am looking for. So I'm going to close these down and come back to what I am building. So I will open up my repo and I'm going to full screen. I'm going to hide my mug for a little bit so that you can just focus on the code. If I need to do any major talking, I will put my face back on the screen, but I'm trying to save you having to look at me for a little bit. So I've got localhost 8000 over here. It's currently not responding. So if I come over to my project here, I can come over to here. I'm just going to run serve, and that is going to run my development server for me. So here we go. There we go. We are running our we are running our API now, and we're getting a very simple request back. Nothing crazy is going on here. So if I walk you through how I've got to this point, if we go to our public index.php, this is the entry point to our application, like all the others. And all we're doing here is we're pulling in vendor autoload. We're going to build our container straight away based off of bootstrap app.php, and within there, all we've got is we've got a container builder. We're adding some definitions, and then we're building. Now this is underlined because it could throw an exception. Probably something I'll worry about a little bit later once I get further down the line with this. So if we look in the config container, you'll see we've got this kernel contract, which accepts a container interface container, which is typed into the container interface, which is a PSR. And within there, whenever we request an instance of kernel contract, we're going to return a new instance of this class called kernel, which is being booted, passing through the base path and passing through the pre-built container. So what that is doing, this is providing us a really nice way to override later down the line. So if this is where I need to jump between repos, unfortunately. So in micro core over here, this is where we have the kernel contract. So this is the contract we were binding to here. And as you can see, we are booting our kernel. We are passing in the base path, which is how we will load in like config and settings. We're passing in our container, which is a container interface, which is again a PSR, and that will return a kernel contract. So it will return something that implements the kernel contract. It also needs to have the base path so that we can return it if we need it for any specific reason. We also want to be able to return an instance of app, which is the Slim underneath our kernel. We then have the container in case we need to pull the container out for anything specific. Then we've got start. This is what we will use to run our application. We're going to pass through an optional request, or we will allow Slim to handle creating the request for us. So that is the interface. Here is the current implementation which is being used. So we've got a kernel class which is implementing the contract, and the entry point starts with boot. And all we're doing is saying, okay, kernel, let's create a new kernel. So we're just going to bind through the base path and the container from the constructor. And then once we have that, we're going to say, okay, so now I want you to build Slim and return the kernel. These bits, the base path, the container, they're just standard getters. App, again, another standard getter. Start is what we've spoken about before. So this is just where we're telling our Slim application to run with a optionally passed in request, which could be null. And now we're looking at build Slim. So this is where we want to tell our app factory that the container we are using is the container which is inside our kernel. And then we're just going to set this app to be the result of app factory create, which will return a Slim app. And that gives us a Slim application wrapped inside our kernel. So when it comes to doing anything else, we will be routing through our kernel here. And what it does, it just kind of provides a slight abstraction layer, which is quite nice. So there is the micro core, and that is how we're binding through this container definition here. So then we're building it. So what this build would do, the container, I like the kernel idea. Yeah, it's something I picked up not too long ago, actually. Looking into how other frameworks was built and looking into how other people did certain things, trying to find a nice middle ground in between, okay, I just want to create a new Slim app and away I go. It's like, how can I kind of protect myself a little bit in case I want to maybe downgrade to Slim 3 because I prefer the API and I want to maintain things myself, or maybe I want to switch over to Mezio, or maybe I want to switch over to another micro framework. If I'm binding through interfaces inside a container and then my application itself is wrapped in a class I can control and I'm just proxying requests through, then I'm adding my own, I'm turning that hexagonal architecture into octagonal architecture, I suppose, in a way there. But anyway, back on task. We're adding all the definitions from there. It's just an array that's being returned, and add definitions just expects variable to go through. And that's it. That's all we need to do for that. Nice and simple. So that's our container built. So now to get our kernel, all we have to do is ask our container to get our kernel contract, and that is going to return an instance of kernel because that has already been bound and built within our container. So from that, we're just going to pull out our Slim application. Then we're going to register our API routes, register our application middleware. We are going to enforce PSR 15 for this. So this is where we're just sending, Slim's got a really nice way to set a default invocation strategy, and that just allows you to choose, okay, are we doing invocable controllers, or are we doing, are we following PSR 15? Are we following PSR 7? How do we want to enforce our routing? If you want to go with a de facto standard, you can remove this little bit of code and just carry on as you were. It's not going to cause any issues. I personally like PSR 15. I think it makes a lot of sense for this small sort of API style. So that is why I've gone for this. And then we literally use kernel start, which proxies through to the Slim app run. Now, what I've done here is I've pulled the app out from the kernel, but there's nothing wrong with me just passing this directly through to these closures here where I need them. But I felt that was maybe a little bit too repetitive, because then I've also got app down there, so I may as well pull it out, because I'm going to follow the rule of 3, where if I'm using something 3 times, I probably need to refactor. I thought I'd better pull that one out. So the routes API, this is relatively simple. It is a function which accepts an argument of app, and all that does is, because we've wrapped this require here, and then we're passing this argument here, it means that we're going to kind of execute what is within here passing through this argument. So it means that we can pass arguments into this function to get app, instead of defining app there, and within this, because we're requiring it, or we could include it, we're now expecting app to magically appear here. Sometimes that can fall over itself. So what I've done is we're returning a function which accepts the argument, And then that is where we register things. We're passing our app instance within there, so we can register all routes within this file nice and easily. And this is our first route. It is to the first / using the route handler and using the name of API route. Now, these are just PHP 8 named arguments. They are not needed. You do not have to use them. I just like them because it makes, well, I use PHP Storm, so if I didn't have that there, it would put it there for me. It would just hint it. So I may as well pop that there myself, because then I can control the formatting a little bit more. So that is our first route. And this route handler here, all this is doing is implementing our request handler interface, which is at PSR 15. And then when we handle, we are getting that server request interface, the request. We are then going to return a response. So we build up a response. And we say, okay, so we're expecting the status for this to be okay. We're going to set the headers to be content type of application vind.api.plus.json, so that we're following JSON API here. So I could probably add that in here. So JSON API spec, that's part of JSON API spec. And then we're going to get for the response, we're going to get the body and write this string into it. We're going to JSON encode this array where we're just passing that into there. And then we're just going to pass through this pretty print and a skip slashes so it looks nice. And then we're just returning that response directly. So it looks like a lot. If you're used to Laravel, what you're probably used to seeing at this point is, okay, so why can't I just do something like, return response JSON, pass through the array and pass through the status code. And I could just say something like name is micro there. That feels a lot easier, right? But it's helper functions on top of helper functions. We could quite easily recreate this behavior within Slim, and it's not going to cause any issues at all. We could probably do something nicer and cleaner. Like my ideal situation here is going to be return a new API response where the body is something, the status is this HTTP status, and the headers I want to extend are here. That is something that I'd look to aim towards at the end. And underneath, this API response is just going to build a response and do all of this kind of in the background, but give you these sensible defaults to get you started. But that's what we'll work towards later on. That's our route handler, and that's our first route. So then we look at our middleware. So middleware-wise, we have got minimal middleware. I've created some Google Flock middleware, and all that does is after middleware, and it's just setting the response with a request header of permissions policy, interest cohort of none. If we've already got the header, then we're just going to return early, just in case. But this is an after middleware because we're handling our request to get the response and then dealing with it there. And that is actually all within the micro core. So any application that I build using micro core, I can then pull that in quite quickly and easily. Then we're just going to add the routing middleware. So add the built-in routing middleware to the app's middleware stack. So this method can be used to control middleware order and is not required for default routing operation. I add it anyway. Body parsing middleware. So add a Slim body parsing middleware to the app middleware stack. Nothing too crazy. Then adding that error middleware. And this is where if we went back to the Slim framework here, or one of the other ones that I've now closed, but we saw that part where we're going, okay, add error middleware, true, 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 and you couldn't quite tell what it was. This is where PHP named arguments will really play in your favor. You were saying that you want to display error details. You do want to log errors, and you also want to log the error details. Eventually, this would pull from something like .env file, which would be tied into the config, and you could start to control this on a kind of environment basis. But for now, nice and simple, just keep it in like that. And that's kind of the purpose of Slim. You keep things small, you keep things simple, you keep things kind of to the point. You want to control things when you need to control things. And then, yeah, kernel start. And that is our app up and running in, not that many lines of code. That is us with an API, a very basic API, but that is us with a Slim API. Now, where can we go from here? We can start to build out parts of our application. So we've got our application handlers. So we've got a RIP handler over here. Let's say maybe we want to look at databases and we want to look at migrating our databases and how can we handle that sort of thing within here. So this is where we want to look at something like server. I'm going to rename that one, and then I'm going to create this one, and we'll just call this one composer for now. So this is where we want to look at something like Symfony console. We want to pull in a Symfony console, and we want to start being able to use our application, right? We want to be able to say, okay, so we want to migrate our database, and we want to proxy some calls through to how we're going to migrate this data. Because for this, we are going to use Doctrine Deval, so the database abstraction layer, and Doctrine Migrations. So I didn't think using Eloquent for this would be, the right fit. I'm trying to build something here which is lightweight, which is forcing me to write, pretty lean PHP code that is very declarative, which means that I want to, go as close to the core and close to the bone as possible. So using a simple query builder like Doctrine Deval is probably a good start for that. So what we'll do is, here is our micro project, here's a micro core. I don't think we need to add much to our micro core right now. It's not doing much. It doesn't need to do much more right now. There's some stuff I've added in here for later on. Hey, Rich, thanks for turning up, buddy. We've got stuff in here, like I've got a scheduler kernel, which is going to handle scheduling events so that we can run cron jobs, but that's probably a different stream. Then we've got the disable flock middleware, and then we've just got the kind of different contracts available. So this is more kind of like more of a meta repo. This isn't something that you need to worry about. It's got a README, but chances are, if you're implementing this, you may as well just pull in this one and get started. All you got to do is, if you don't want to follow PSR 15, just delete that, delete those few lines there, and away you go. So we'll stick with this one for now. So here's our index.php, and what we probably want to start with first is, let's have a look. We've got our invocation strategy, we've got code starting. What dependencies do we actually want to use? We could start to look at like maybe doing some sort of logging, perhaps. Logging is always kind of useful when it comes to these sorts of applications. So how about we say composer require monologue, and that is now installed. So this is a difference between Laravel and Slim PHP. If this was a Laravel package, that would be set up, it would be done, it would be good to go. Maybe I'd publish a config file because the service provider's already been built. Now, service providers are just a gateway to tell the Laravel's container how to build the contained services, register these things into the container or boot these things on the container as soon as the application runs. And all we're doing here is we're just taking that more manual approach, I suppose. So now if we come down to config into our container, we can get a container definition, which is here, which is, it's relatively clean, it's relatively small, there's not much going on. Sorry, wrong tab. I just opened up a stream of myself while on a stream. So all we need to do is we want to get the logger interface. What we'll do, we'll simplify that one. But what we want is, this is going to be when we call this, we are going to call this function. We want you to automatically inject the container, because there's probably stuff that we're going to want from the container. And to start with, we probably want to start getting some information out. Best way to do this is probably going to be logger. How can we add the logger? Okay, we need to create a new logger first. So we'll just go logger is a new logger. Now this takes an argument, which could be the name. So for now, I'm going to default just passing in the name of micro. And I will, again, simplify that class name for ease of reading. Then once we've got our logger, we also want to think about a line formatter maybe. And we're also going to have to think about a push handler, I think they call it, or you've got a processor and you've got a handler and a formatter. There's several different things that you can use when it comes to monologue. So eventually what we'll have is we will return this logger directly from there. So the first step, let's look at getting a processor. So the best one to use I've found for building small apps like this is just to go, let's just use a UID processor. It doesn't take any arguments. I can just pull that one in. And then we can tell the logger to use its push processor. And the callback is going to be this new processor here, which we could actually just drop into there. So callback is that. Got that temporary variable, perfect. The next step is just to create a handler. And I'm going to assume, again, we could probably skip the creation stage and just say logger push handler, and the handler we want to use is going to be a stream handler. Now the stream handler takes a stream, which is like a resource path, and it will take like a default level. So I'm going to leave that like that for now. Let's get this tidied up from a formatting perspective. So there's our new stream handler. Simplify that. And for this one, what we probably want to do is nicest way to do this. We could just tell this to go to the standard out for PHP for now, until we start to set up config and environment variables and stuff. So we're just going to stick that one straight out to standard error for PHP. And with level, we're just going to go for logger debug as standard right there. That is our another instance created. So now if we come over to index.php, for example, and instead of starting our application down the bottom here, what we'll do is we'll start to just kind of play around with this. So we'll do a quick dyn dump on our kernel. And if we come over to here, we've got a new kernel. We've got a Slim app preloaded. It's got lots of stuff already built. Here's our container, which is just linking to this container. So we've got resolved entities, we've got a container, we've got a container interface, we've got loads of stuff going on, a kernel contract. And then we have also got fetched definitions. We've only got the kernel contract. We've got proxy factories. resolving sources. This is digging deep into how it works, which is getting messy. So we haven't needed the logger yet. So what we can do at this point is, let's say our root handler, which is in app handlers, root handler. Let's say we have the way that we do things typically in something like Slim, which is using a dependency injection container, would have a public function construct method here. And on this method, this is where we would inject things. This is how our container would work. We'd say, okay, so we want to use a logger interface. That's going to hit that container. And we're going to call this logger. That's going to, when this root handler is created through the container or through Slim, it's going to construct this class for us. And it will follow a chain down to use the logger, to inject the logger and get the logger for us. So what we can do down here, we can say this logger info, we can just drop a message and we can just say something like log from root handler. So now if we just got this, and if we hit this, and we come to our terminal, you can see some information coming down here now. So we've got log from root handler. Here's our root handler. And what we can do, we can also we can play with the formatter as well. So let's say instead of using this stream handler, for example, we might want to do something like a rotating file, for example. So let's swap that out and let's actually maybe not stream handler. Will that give us level bubble file permission, use locking? No, none of that. That's not what we want to do. Push handler. Can we set formatting to the logger, I wonder? No, we can set time zone. We'd have to use a different formatter to start, different push handler to start formatting. So I'll probably worry about that a little bit later on. But what I typically do, I'd probably build this up so it's config driven again, much like Laravel is, because that's one of the huge benefits I found with Laravel is that it's config driven development. I can just really easily, boot things up and create things really quickly because it's in the config and that's controlled by the environment. And then when I get to pushing it to my staging server, I tweak the environment and it behaves in this way. And it'll be great to be able to replicate some of that behavior. But here is our logger. That is that part done. So if I just check this, I can just add that. And what we'll do is we'll commit this and say adding other interface and monolog. Nice and simple. That is now on Git, so you can play with that if you want to. Is us adding our logging. Our next step, before we go too far, let's go back and look at Slim skeleton. This one. So if we look in their dependencies, we've got a logger interface there. That's nothing too crazy going on there. If we come back, repositories, we're adding a user repository and they're auto wiring in this in-memory user repository. How else are we doing things? Doing setting up some settings, which is some custom code. So we could worry about that a little bit later. Could get some config loading. That's what we can do. We get some config in here. because what is an application without config? So that means we need to add a new reference in our container. This is going to be not a logger, not a kernel. This is going to be our config. So if anybody asks for config, run a function. And what this function will do is it will retrieve the container interface, and we'll get the container. Now this should be able to give us the base path straight away. However, because of where this is loaded, we should be able to just directly go back to the base path, which should be fine. So we'll try it. So let's say, okay, we'll get a new loader. We're going to need a couple of packages first. I'm going to make this bigger. These are some packages I've created before. So we can say composer require one of my packages, and we're going to go for config loader. Cannot find. Oh, just Steve King. I think spell my name right tonight. One of those days. So there we go. Config loader, that's been pulled. And the next one is just config. And those are the two things that we need. So now we can say that our loader is a new config loader. And the base path we want to use is their name, and we could say current directory level. Pass that through basically. Let's just simplify that. So here's our loader. And with our loader, let's load the name, and let's just say we want to keep our project settings within, let's rename config to settings. So we could say PHP file in here, call it settings. Quick types, and we want, here's our settings. Our app name is going to be, which is called, let's call this app, this file app. Then we can name things nicer. This is all, settings to do with our application. So our app name is going to be micro. So within here, we've got settings, load, app. At that point, our loader has now got all the information that we need. So now we can say, can return get a new repository. We're going to build a new repository with the items that our loader has. Now we could chain these on. We could have multiple of these, or we could say load all. We don't want to load all because we have other things in here which aren't to do with it. So at this point, we want to be specific and say just load our app, pull back our config, build up our repository. And then once we've got that, our settings is going to be that repository. So unused, so that build, that should return a new one, which is fine. Yeah, cool. So that is all good. That is all good. There's our settings. So at this point, let's go back to our root handler. This is a good way to test if it's going to work. And we could just say, okay, let's just inject, instead of a logger, let's we could just use, has this got an interface available? No, just array access. Okay, we could just say repository class there instead of key setting for that. That's not needed. Right, so in our root handler, swap that for our repository. We call this config. Let's zoom in again, sorry. At this point, we've got a repository, which is pulling in config. We have now pulled in that up there. So up the top, we could just dump on this config get app. So if we come over to here, we get our config options pulling back from our settings nice and quickly. So it means that we don't actually have to do that. We can remove that. Let's come down to here and let's just replace that. This config get app.name. Come back as micro. So if we come back to our settings here, that micro app, it changes again. Now we could eventually pull this into something like the php.env, but for now, keeping it standard, keeping it in here, less things to go wrong while we're kind of experimenting. So we can now pull through everything that we want to. Our container is working nicely. We've got application, we've got logging availability, and we've got config. Now that's available in our root handler here, but in future we might want to pass other things into here, and you can pass multiple things. So we could also pass in the logger into here if we wanted to, and it wouldn't cause too many issues. But what this will do is it will pre-build anything passed in, so it's kind of it reducing the need for something like a service provider. We could create service providers, but there's not much need. We've got PHP DI in this, which is really good. This is the dependencies here. We've got the micro core, which is controlling. It's got a few interfaces which we're using to keep things flexible. Then we've got status code package, which I've got, which is super simple, and all it does is it's got a lot of constants, and instead of using any other package, it's clean, it's simple. All of these are pulled directly from Wikipedia, and other packages which do similar functionality, they've got ways to manage headers and do other things. Nothing's got just this plain, simple standard class. So that's why I use it. I know what it does and I know how to use it. So there we go. That is that part done. The other things we've got going on is our config loader, which is a super simple package. And all that does is it reads files from a directory, PHP files. They've got to be an array, and it will just pull config. It will combine the config. It will key it by the file name. So I could have database.php, keep content within there, load that one through, and I'll have access to kind of get content that way. And then obviously we've got a config package here, which is the dot notation of basically cycling through arrays. So two different packages built over a different period of time, both relatively useful for what I'm trying to do. We've got PHP DI, which is our dependency injection container, which is absolutely fantastic, if I'm honest. It is the dependency injection container for humans. If you go through the documentation, there's a lot you can do. There's a way you can use a Slim bridge, and you can say bridge create for the app, which will create the Slim application for you, or you could do things manually yourself. You can enable, disable auto wiring. You can I believe you can cache it, and you can do all sorts of cool stuff. But that's for something later. So we've now got this. We've got our application. We've got a basic application, which is going to allow us to read from config and handle routing. Super simple. At this point, we need something slightly more useful. So let's have a look at Doctrine Deval. We'll look at migrations later or another time, but for now, let's just worry about reading from a database, because I've got a database I can play with right now. So while we're kind of checking these sorts of things. So how do I install you? Introduction, vendor autoload, lots of stuff. Okay, cool. So the next page along is obviously architecture, which not important right now. Okay, that tells me how to create a connection. I'm assuming I'm going to have to guess the installation name, so bear with. We will come over to micro and come to terminal. I'm going to assume composer, acquire, doctrine. Hey, we got that. It wasn't so hard. So that is installing a few composer package version depreciated, Doctrine Event Manager, Doctrine Depreciations, Doctrine Cache, and Doctrine Deval. Nothing too crazy. The list of things that we're acquiring isn't getting out of hand, which is great. So our next step is going to be, okay, so how can we load Doctrine into this, I suppose. So config. Let's go config and let's say, okay, let's create a new database file. Within here, we're going to keep this relatively simple. As usual, I declare script types in any new file. And then within here, we just want to return an array. This array is going to be relatively simple. It's going to be kind of clean, not going to have too much going on in it. We will have this is our database. So the options that we need for configuration, we will need database name, user, password, host, and driver. So I will just grab those. This is what we need. Basically that. So DB name, we will use, let's find a database that I have. And we will just use, have I got anything on that? Nope, nothing on that one. PHP Online. PHP Online is pretty good. We can just use PHP Online for now. So we can just look at articles and stuff. So we use a PHP Online database connection. This is my local one. So I can say, okay, so database name is PHP Online. I've just got root and root set up, and we're going to use PDO MySQL. And then within our dependencies, we need to set up a way to create this connection. So let's close a lot of that down. We don't need most of that right now. This is the first time I've actually used Doctrine Deval, so bear with me. I will muddle through. We're going to need to create a connection. So connecting using your URL. So connection. Anytime we need a connection, we are going to run this function, which is going to inject the container interface. So we've got that container ready inside our function to pull out the settings. So let's just simplify that one. So then we can say config equals container get a repository. Okay, let's just wrap that like that. That should give us some config. And this should give us a repository class, which is the same as that one. So at this point, we can create a connection. And we're going to say, if we looked at those docs, we needed to get the driver manager and get connection passing through the parameters. So I can say driver manager, get connection, pass through the params, and for that I will then go config get database, and that's it. That gives us our connection. And let's just return the connection for now. I believe that should be enough. I can just return there. So I can remove that. Let's simplify that. That gives us a basic connection class, which is just going to create a new connection from the configured settings. Why is it complaining like that? Okay, so drop that named argument in the container for now, just to make sure it doesn't cause issues. That gives us a repository. That'll do all of that magic. Perfect. So let's create a new route to test this. So in here, we're going to create a test route. This is what we're going to do our testing with. We're going to do an apt get to test. So we can drop that down, call that pattern. Let's zoom in so people can see. So the pattern, we're worrying about /test. And the callable, we are going to do a test handler in a second, and then we'll just set the name for, keeping it standard, API test done. So our handlers up here, we can go to create a new PHP class. We can call this test handler, already in the right namespace. We can then implement the request handler interface. That will give us some defaults straight away and get us part set up, which means that this will start to route things nicely. Come back to here. Let's just go to /test. Returned value must be of type PSR response interface. Nothing's returned. That's because we're not returning yet, which is fine. Expected that much. So within here, let's just close that down. So let's go for our public function construct. Within here, for now, we're just going to say we want our connection. We're using PHP 8. We're going to do it this way. And then within here, we're just going to do, how can we use Doctrine now? So that gives us all of that. And let's say, how's the easiest way to use Doctrine? It's got to be a nice, easy way to use Doctrine, right? I mean, eventually I'll start creating repositories and all of that sort of stuff. Oh, we can search. Cool. How do I do a select? Apparently we don't want to do a select. We don't want to give you search options, Steve. Statement. Right. So I can say, okay, the connection, create query builder. Oh, perfect. So I can say query builder, do this. Cool. So perfect. So I can now say builder equals this connection create query builder, and then let's just do a die and dump on builder, select select our database. Where's our database? Come back database. Table plus, where are you? There you go. Let's just get the UUID and title. So let's select the UUID and let's select the title. I guess I can say from the table name, which is going to be articles. And that's all I want. Does that mean it's going to execute it, or do I need to run a specific function? Params must be an array. Given in container line 67. Line 67. Okay, so this isn't injecting the way we'd want it to. So at this point, let's just do a quick dyn dump on our config. I've got it. So that's our repository. Should we get, where's that at? Oh, wait. Silly me. I haven't told the repository to load database yet. Another boo-boo. There we go. So we've got two items. We've got app and database. So that's fine. So when we're coming down here, when I say config get database, is this now going to return what I'm expecting? Yes, it is. It is giving me what I want. So this should hopefully stop complaining and give me what I want. Cool. SQL parts. Yep, that's cool. I got that. But now I actually want to actually see some information, please. I want to get some information. When maybe like a fetch all or a. This is pretty much just a relatively pretty wrapper around PDO. So in theory, I should be able to do something like fetch all associative. Cool. Let's see. Oh wait, what's that going to do? Unhandled exception. Okay. I might just fetch all. Like, might not be what I want. Associative? Oh, you know what? It's going to complain, but I'm going to give it a go. Hey, we got some data, but we've only got one, which is really annoying. So that's selecting, that's building our query. Inserting, updating, where clauses, distinct table aliases, grouped by, joining, order by. Here's a query stuff. Building expressions, where expression and blah, blah, blah. Yep, that's all looking good. But how do we execute a query? That is the main thing. How do we say, like, fetch, data retrieval, and manipulation? So here's that. Here's our statement. That's building up a statement, and then we just need to say fetch this. That's doing it that way, but what happens if we're using the query builder? Using prepared statements, type conversion stuff. Oh, wait, what's that? Statement execute query. Okay, it's not giving me an option on the builder that I can see, so I might just have to maybe do it slightly differently. So let's say that our query is going to be, you want to select the UUID and the title from rules. Why is it complaining now? Yeah, that's fine. I'm not bothered about that. So that means we can then say connection prepare. Cool. So our statement will then be this connection prepare, and the SQL we're passing through is our query. And then we should be able to get a results, which is going to be a statement execute query. No, maybe we'll give it a go. Let's just dive and jump on that. Probably should have just done plain old result sets. But hey, statement, okay, connection. It's given us something that I don't know how to use. Perfect, just what I wanted for Christmas. Risk query, fetch associative. Okay, can we just say no? Okay, so statement execute query, bind value, get wrapped statement, execute query, and that's going to give me something, so I can fetch associative. So again, I've only got one result coming back, although I know I've got a lot of data within there. Execute the query, then call fetch. What fetch do I need there? I'm not used to Doctrine. I want fetch all, but that one's depreciated, sorry. Fetch all associative, fetch first column. Yeah, I want all. Fetch one isn't good, fetch. Okay, I'll just try and use fetch. Not gonna, no. Yeah, I'm selecting that. If I want to be horribly nasty. Yeah, I'm so not used to Doctrine. I've been using Eloquent for way too long, haven't I? I have to pass anything extra in to fetch associative. No. No options, this fetch associative. No. It's just given me one result, which is odd. But hey, we won't worry about that yet. What we'll do is that's the results. We will then do let's just create a response as a new response, which is a Slim response. And the status we want to set on this is going to be okay for now. It's all good. Response with header. And let's just set the content type to the application. Oh, fetch all associative. Hey. I don't know why I chose Doctrine, because I've not used it in a very, well, as you can see, a very, very long time. As response, at the end, we're just going to return the response. And what we'll do is here we'll get the response, get the body, and then we are going to write. We need to write in a string. And within there, we are going to JSON encode. Fetch all associative. What is it? Is that giving me an array back? Which should be giving me an array, I assume. So I'm going to make a wild assumption and say results in there. And the second argument is I'll just copy that straight over from my root handler. down here. Just going to grab that for a second argument. Maybe we'll drop that in an array and say that the data is, so now put that there, flip that into that, and away you go. And now we can come back, bang. So that is the first time I've done this in a very, very long time. As you can imagine, I've been using Laravel and Eloquent for a lot for the last 6 to 7 years. So that is us getting lots of information back, and that is a query which worked. That's getting our test handler. That works. That's worked a lot better than I thought it would do. So for now, I'm going to just commit this. This isn't something that I'd recommend using yet. It's something that's going to be polished over a few streams and in my spare time. So adding in Doctrine debug and testing queries. Because what I'd like to do is I'd like to push this into using repositories and using something a little bit more sensible, a little bit nicer. So what I'd like to do before that is, it's almost 9. I've been streaming for 1 hour and 10 minutes. That's not too bad. I'd like to come back to this micro core and create something. So we'll ignore that for now. I'm going to create a new directory within here. And within HTTP, I'm going to create a new class, which is going to be called an API response. So we'll drop this in the right namespace. Just Steve King, micro HTTP. Micro HTTP, that's all good for me. Perfect. Right, and what this is going to do is when you create one, I want to say, let's say we're creating one. This is what we were talking about earlier. So with a public function create. No. Let's refactor. Let's rename this. Rename API response. It is a factory after all. Here's our API response factory. We're going to do a static function called make, and we are going to return a response interface. So here we go. We can start. So this is going to take a couple of options. Now, when we talk about responses, we know we are going to need a couple of things. We are going to need, because it's an API, I want to pass through an array. I want to pass through the data, which is going to default to an empty array. So that we can just pass null. We want to pass through an integer as the status code. And we could say that our default is going to be, okay, we need to install a package here. Composer require just Steve HTTP status code. The default will be, okay. And then we will pass through an array of optional headers. And that is all we will need. So what we've done over here is we create a new response. We set the status. We want to set some header stuff, and then we're going to write into the body. So what I'd like to do is kind of cut out half of this. So let's say hit the new response. Here's my Slim response. Perfect. And in the end, we'll just be returning the response. The status there is going to be passed in status. The next step, if we look at the root handler, we'll follow that pattern because I know that one worked nicely. So this is where we can say for each headers as the key value, you can say response equals response with header. The name is the key, and the value is the value. Here's that. That's us tackling headers. That's us tackling the status code. Our next step is to get the body and right. And because this is an API, we can do that really easily by saying get body, right, the string we're passing through. We want to JSON encode it. Let's just pass through the data, which has been passed up there. And then we're going to pass through the formatting options, which we did before. Use print or escape slashes. Zoom out a little bit, see how that looks. So that's just giving us a API response factory make, and it's returning that response. That's kind of simple. That is how I like it. So I can now add this, commit and say, commit and say that it's API response factory. Push that up. That's now working as up on there. So over here, I can just quickly do a composer update to pull down the latest version of Microcore. And then instead of all of this, I can grab that. I can say that the response here is a API response factory make. The data is going to be this array. Come on, keyboard. Let's work today, shall we? Our data. With that, our status is going to be the default, so we don't need to pass that one in. So we can say that our headers is going to be content type and that. It means we can really simplify this for you. I can drop that now. That I can drop. That should give me a response, and in theory, I should just be able to say return that, which will still work, hopefully, as I expected. There we go, micro app, done. And suddenly we're a lot simpler. And this is where we could start making things like what Laravel's got. We could turn this, instead of the factory, we could make a helper function, but then we're just abstracting and hiding this API which we've created, which is very obvious what we're doing. For helper functions, you've got to dig into to understand. This, not so much. So what I can now do in my test handler over here, I can grab all of this. I can grab data results. Let's just grab something like that. All we need is pull that through. Let's follow the lines nicely. That. Wife just swore at me, how rude. And we can wrap all of that in that. So our data is going to be that. and that. So suddenly things are looking cleaner and things are looking easier. So it's probably a nicer way we could do some of this. And when we start to use repositories, all of this will be hidden anyway. So that is our API response factory, and we're making that. We could probably start to use something like Fractal to start transforming this, but we'd probably chain that along in some way. That worked a lot better than I thought it would do, and a lot quicker than I thought it would do. So let me add that. Add that, and we will commit it and say refactoring. Ooh, can't spell. Refactoring to API response factory. This is how you can get along with Slim PHP. You build things the PSR way, which feel a little bit more long-winded and a bit more wordy, and you refactor and you build things and you extend it and you make things the way that it's going to work better for you. With that, eventually that's going to change. Here's our API. We've got 2 routes, relatively simple routes. Our container has got a connection manager in it now. There's our repository. Kernel logger. Yeah, we are looking good for a Slim boilerplate, because now we can just very quickly add the routes that we want, create the queries, return a response, and that's it. But things like authentication we can start to look at as well. We can start looking at how we could possibly do that sort of thing, how we might want to do it. Okay, so let's look at the next thing. Let's look at that. I think one thing we could look to do is maybe look at how we're going to how could we play with this? What could we get working? What could look nice? Ideally, what should I do? Anyone got ideas? What would you like to see with Slim PHP right now? While I'm trying to figure out what we could possibly do to make this absolutely fantastic. I mean, one idea is maybe a command bus. Add a quick command bus. So we're following CQRS. We can start to have a command bus, query bus. Maybe start separating our read-write databases. So all we have to do for this is composer require league technician. Technician is now pulled in. So now down here we can just go, okay, so we want our command bus. Let's simplify that. And then container interface, container, might not need the container, but we'll pull it in just in case. And eventually we will return a new command bus. Have some options within it pre-built. To get to that point, we need the technician command bus. You need a inflector, and for that we'll just do a handle inflector. Then we will also need a locator. We'll use an in-memory locator. There's our locator. And then with our locator, we can add a handler. And this is where we probably want to look at how we're going to add our handlers. But before we look at that part, we will come down here and we will say we need to add the middleware. So we'll just call this handler middleware. And this is a new command handler middleware. That's going to take an extractor. The first option is an extractor. Command name extractor, and for that we'll just use the class name extractor. Once all of this is built up, it's then very easy to start doing. So method name inflector and handler locator. So we'll go for handler locator next. So that is just our locator. And then the method name inflector is this. We don't need to do anything else. We can just drop that in. We can drop that. As they're not needed. And we can return the command bus, which is going to take the argument of array middleware. So middleware, and we will just use handler middleware. And that is our command bus setup. Next step for this is how we want to load in these commands. So one way I think might be nice is to get a loader. And our base path is going to be current directory. Yep, current directory. That works for me. And then we want the loader to load a command bus. So that will give us everything within here. So we can then create a file called command bus. Add that. There are strict types because we like them. This will return an array. Ugh, come on, get used to my keyboard. All right, and then within there, this is going to be like an array of command mapping stuff. So there's our command bus. So added that, done that. At this point, we just time dump on loader config. That should give us some test handler on our connection. We'll do that, but we're also going to pull in command bus. Just put bus for now. That should now run through that because it's kind of be injected. We can delete that because we don't need it, and we can delete that because we don't need it, and we can come back here and go to test. Cannot load from micro command bus. Ooh, okay, so my config is doing it wrong. New loader. Command bus is there. Okay, we'll drop the dir name. How do we do that on the repository? Okay, we wanted something similar to that because that is loading in app from the same place. Container. Okay, we will do that again. Command bus, we have nothing in it, perfect. So that means we can start coming to here, handlers, naming conventions. This is where we want to start looking at, you know, how we want to start naming some of these things. So let's handlers, application, directory, articles, and then within articles, we would do something like a class which is, I don't know, list articles command. That namespace can be in app articles. That'll be it for now. So here's one that we can add, a command bus. We can set this up quite quickly with new list articles command, and then within that we want to pass in a container. Yeah, do that for now. We'll play with this. We'll play with it. Then that handler is going to be the other way around, I think. Yes, other way around. Other way around. List articles command comes afterwards. The class name which we're going to execute, and then handler first. So we want the list articles handler first. So we'll create that class too. So within here, for now, we'll just create a new one. We'll say list articles handler. Perfect, added. Zoom in a little bit. What we would do is this will when we're constructing this, we want to private connection. We're just replacing part of what was in the test handler, and then that part. Then this should have a handle method, and I'm not too sure on the return type yet, but this is where we will basically want to replace this, I believe. Yeah, I think. Query statement results, and we can return the results. Playing this by ear, so bear with. This connection, prepare, doing all of that, and then we can just return the results there. And those results. And how could I do it? The handle needs to accept something too. So that will accept the list articles command as the command. I'll pull in the command. It will do, if a command is needed or got anything on that. So this is more of a. It doesn't really have much on it, to be honest. I could, start adding public function UUID, and that's going to return a UUID. We could start adding things on that, but right now that command doesn't have any data that's required. This might be maybe a little bit too simplistic as an example. So there's that. Command bus config. So then command bus, make sure that is mapped. Let's make sure that is there. Okay, so we don't want this to be an array. We're going to want to load this differently. So return function container interface container. And this is going to be doing that, and then we can just return a, which will have the new list articles handler, and then the connection can be container get connection. And we could simplify that quickly. It'd be nice if I could pull some of this through the DI container. With that, I just simplify that. And then that is going to give us, it's just going to get messy, isn't it? It is. Let's just remove that command bus config. We're going to do it all in the container for now. Look at nicer ways to do it. So drop the loader, drop that, and so this is where we want the locator, add handler, and here we can say we want a new list articles handler, and within there we want to say container get connection. And that is going to run the list articles command. And that, hopefully, isn't going to crap out on us. Cool. So we're kind of back where we were with that little part there. So up here, we can hopefully now we can drop that connection. Instead of running this, we should be able to say results equals this handle new list articles command, and find dump on the results. We got it back. We are now doing it that way. And we're now using a command bus to start a query. Eventually, that will, our command itself would, at this point would pass any arguments into here if we're filtering the query. That technically should be a query itself, but that's beside the point for this example. But all we're doing in this command, we could pass an argument for the list articles. We could start to pass filters. We could start to pass things that could be reflected within this handle method here. So fetch all associative, that is going to return an array. So we can just grab that as well. Let's just do a little bit of tidy up before we finish this off. There we go. Don't complain about that. So if you're going to complain, I've put it in double quotes. Yeah, it's more actions. No, I'm ignoring that. So there we go. Ignore the dialect thing for now. But we're getting through the command here. So if we wanted to, we could come here and just die and dump on the command. Let's say that this command had a public function, public function columns. This is going to return an array, maybe. Yeah, we'll say an array. An array, and list all articles. For this, we're just going to return UID and title. The columns. So when we come in here, we get the command. Here's that So we should be able to say command columns. So now we can amend our query. Say, okay, let's select implode command columns. There we go. If we come back to here, that's great. But now if we amend our command, we can say, okay, we also want to add in the slug. Edit it there. Start to pull it through. We want the user ID. Start to create things nicely and a little bit more constructively, and it's kind of fun at the same time. So that, I think I'm going to call that a night. It's been under 2 hours for a change, but we've done quite a lot. So for now, I'm going to add all of this, commit it as refactor request handler to use command bus.
I'm still doing laundry if I can.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'll keep going.
You can stop if you want, but because I'm watching you, I'm still doing laundry, so there's no point sitting there watching me do laundry.
I can live with that. Right. The wife just told me she's still doing laundry, so I may as well carry on. So that is now as refactored to using a command bus, which was, took 10 minutes. Let me have a quick drink because I've been talking a lot and it's quite warm in my house. Okay. What else could we possibly add? What could be useful? I would say I'd like to use something like what's it called? I was talking to the author earlier today. Fractal. I would say we could use something like Fractal, but I think the problem with using Fractal for this at the minute is I was talking to Matthew Trask, the maintainer, and they're going to be working on a new version, and I'm going to do my best to help them because I like APIs. So I wouldn't use it just yet. I'm going to have a look at what I can do around that a little bit later. So what's the next step? We don't need that. Has this got anything that we could find useful? Repositories, I suppose. User repository. In memory user repository, and then the user repository up here. Well, let's have a look. Could we use repositories, do you think? Response emitter, handlers. No, domain, user repository. We can start to build things that way. I think repository pattern is going to be a stream on its own because there's a lot that you need to consider. Also, do you want to use just the debal or do you want to pull in the full ORM for Doctrine? How do you want to handle migrations? Domain exception, no. Persistence layer for the user in memory. Kind of cool, but not what I'm after. Options. Anybody watching that's got ideas on what they'd like to see? Any specific middleware that I could possibly add? Perhaps. Add I don't know, negotiation middleware. Could add caching if you really wanted to. Caching is definitely something that I'd look at after I've done repositories usually. Anyone at all? Okay, let's have a look at something else. What can we do? What can we do? Let's say, okay, so we know we can query data. We know we've got database connection sorted. Command bus works not quite what we want it to, how we want it to work right now. So maybe we could look at how we can work with that. I know. Composer, require, Symfony, console. There we go, Symfony console. Because what is an application these days without a console, right? So we will just create a new file within here, and we're going to call this micro. We're going to match that to, let's do that for now. Yeah, sure, whatever. So micro. And PMV, I'm pretty sure this is the right way to do it. And we can then say require directory and auto load stop PHP. And so now we're just going to say echo test PHP end of line, done. Right, so if now I just run PHP micro, we've got it. We've got it started. Repositories. Oh, there's a plugin for Doctrine, is there? And repositories. That's definitely on my list. I think I need to plan my attack with Doctrine because I'm relatively inexperienced when it comes to Doctrine, if I'm really honest. And you know, I never used Doctrine properly. I kind of just used PDO instead. I found it a little bit easier just to do it that way. So here is the console application documentation for it. Okay, I can install it. Auto load. This is the correct way. Use a bin env. Then we can create our application, register commands, and run. Cool. So let's just do that. And in Steve fashion, we definitely need to declare strict types, even though it's on the CLI. Zoom in a little bit. And let's just drop that in. So our application, does it take any arguments? We can take a name. Take a name as an argument. And we are going to call this micro. Version, you can say 0.0.1. Oh, we are getting somewhere. Now, if I clear that and PHP micro, we've got stuff. We've got our micro application, help list, lots of cool stuff. Yeah, Doctrine, I've avoided Doctrine because it can be quite overwhelming. So there's a lot involved, and it's a case of how much do I want to use it. So it's a very good point. Okay, so first thing, let's do something. Let's do something with our commands here. Registering commands. So let's register a new command. We're going to create one. We can add a new generate admin command. So before we do that, I know full well that most of my commands are going to want something, right? This is another entry point. It's very similar to this. So what we need is we need our container and we need our app. So let's just grab those. Should the version, no, the version eventually won't be hard-coded. Eventually the version will be doing something else. So let's just pull that in with kernel contract, and this shouldn't affect our CLI at all. Yes, it does. Failed opening the required. No, that's fine. That's a me bad. So there we go. That should now work. Perfect. I've now got my container and I have got my kernel. So is there a way on Slim to get all the roots? This is what we want to add a command. So let's add in application add, or actually I'm going to rename this variable to CLI to stop me getting confused. We're going to rename this to CLI. There we go. CLI run. So CLI add. We're going to add a command. We're going to add a new root list command, and that is going to take in our kernel. Now that might get changed later on. Might just pass into Slim or something. Actually, kernel app. Running the bus in this CLI would be really cool. I've got access to it. I can make the command bus at this point and start to perform operations. All I've got to do is pass it into the command, really. So source application. We're going to create a console directory within here, and the only thing we're going to have for our console is command. So I'm not going to double namespace things. So we're just going to create a PHP class called root list command, and we'll say app console. Ooh, I don't know what I'm spelling there. App console. Done. And this command, it needs to learn more console commands. Creating a new one. It needs to extend a command. So that I can do. That extend a command. Now let's import that, and that is a Symfony command. Perfect. So that needs a protected static default name. A protected static default name, which is going to be root list, because sounds like Laravel, very much used to that. We can also add the protected static default description. We can say something like all registered roots. And then constructor, this is where we need to look into it. So the function construct, got the name. So that's doing the parent constructor, which is all fine. Construct passing in a name, that's going to do all that magic, cool. But this specific one for me, I'm passing in something else. And we are going to pass in our Slim instance here. So what we'll do, we'll just call this Slim. Slim kernel app, and then we'll say app Slim. What we'll do, we'll make this a private there. This might complain, but I suppose we'll see. Only ever written not read. Perfect. So now if I run that again, root list command not found. That's fine. I can now import that class. That should solve that issue. I can now go PHP micro root list. we must override the execute method. Perfect, just what I wanted. So execute method, this part. This is what we want to run. So for input interface, we need to make sure we import that class. Make sure we import that as well. So the next step would be return command success. That's going to be that. Now, if we just kind of run that, hey, it ran. Okay, so we've got our app. So we should be able to say this app, maybe Slim, sorry, Slim. Get container, get callable resolver, get root collector, and that roots. At that point, can I do a quick dying dump on roots? If they're collected somewhere, you know you've got to be able to access them. Empty array right now. Okay. Oh, that is because I'm creating a new app. That is because I'm creating a new app. Oh dear, not what I wanted. Okay, so one way to get around this is going to be we're gonna still want to load in our roots, aren't we? So we just don't want to run the app. So in micro up here, container, kernel app. That is not going into there, so that now should have extra roots. Perfect, we've got stuff. So get roots, giving us something. So our root list command, get roots, is going to give us a root interface. So now we want to look at tables or something. Configure, no, not that interesting. Register the command, right line, new output sections. Console input, no. Service container testing, learn more. Format table. Here we go. This is what I want. I need something like this. Bang. So table is a new table, pass to the output, and then we just table render. That table. Up. That's simply no, not a schema table. Component console helper, and then we can table render. DD on that. Then table set headers and set rows. Okay. So for now, we're going to do a run over for each root as a root. Let's just dump out the first root and see what it's actually giving us. Because we need to kind of play with this a little bit. We are getting a lot of stuff, so let's just reset the terminal. Box top or somewhere. Oh no, it's not doing it, is it? Okay, kill that one. Create a new one. I can't scroll on that one. There we go. This one is giving us a routing root, Slim routing root. So what options do we have with a Slim routing route? So go to vendor, come down to Slim, routing, we've got a route. So it's got methods, it's got, what has it got on it that's accessible? Callable resolver. Get the methods, so we can see what the methods are. We could get the pattern. Get callable. Okay, so let's play with that. So root get methods. Get callable. Okay. I'm starting to see that we can create a table here quite easily. So table, set headers, and we're going to set a few options on it. Table headers, and we're going to have these things here. And we'll have the methods. We're going to have the path. We're going to have the callable. And I'm pretty sure we can have name as well. So what we'll do is we'll do something like collected routes up the top here. So for each one, we're going to collected add in into that, and that is going to have methods. Load, comma, the route methods. And alongside methods, we're going to have the path, which is going to be the route get pattern. No. Set pattern, get pattern. I'm assuming pattern could be part of it. Set callable, name, identifier. Could be the identifier. Let's have a look. Get pattern. Leave it like that for now. And dump on identifier first. We're going to hit get identifier. Okay. Keep that open because I'm going to need it. So, what's a pattern? One. Okay, so we've got the path, which is technically the pattern. Then we'll add in the callable, which is going to be the route callable. Then we'll pass in the name, which is the route get name. So that will give us that. Realistically, we don't actually want any of those in there. We can delete all that. We just want a flat array there. We've cycled through all of those. We've added it to the collected. So we've set the headers, and now we want to set rows. The rows we want to set are the collected rows. Now, we're not getting anything. We're not getting anything. Okay. We're rendering the table before we've done anything. That was silly. There we go. We now have methods, path, callable, and a name. That went quite well. App handlers, root handler, and a test handler. I don't know what other options we could get from that, but I don't think we need much more. Arguments. Don't really want to get the arguments really. I mean, you could do if you really wanted to. So you could do like arguments, and you could just put like args in there, extend it that way. Ooh. Implementing to string. Okay, so let's load that. Currently, no arguments. So there is another option. We can now we can just add that. So git add, git commit, add CLI and root list command. Useful. So the other main CLI that we're going to want to look at is Doctrine Migrations. And we're going to want to acquire Doctrine Migrations. Okay, it's complaining about Doctrine debow. So we're just going to say with all dependencies because we're not tied into anything yet. It's still complaining. Doctrine debow to 10, but it conflicts with composer. Okay, so we're using the wrong version of Doctrine for what we want here. So Doctrine debow here, we want to make sure we are on 2.1 apparently. Update. That's updating. Done. And now technically we should be able to just run that, and we got it. So everything we're pulling in, Laminas code, Doctrine Migrations, proxy manager stuff, nothing too crazy yet. We're not getting too out of hand. So that, in theory, building framework is really, yeah, Symfony components are really nice. I'm not going to lie. It is quite nice. So that's giving us all of that. If we run vendor bin Doctrine Migrations, that should give us some sort of something or other. Yeah, migrations up to date. We can do some migratey stuff. This is another command basically. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to dive into some of this. The color scheme. For which bit? For my console or for my my code itself? I believe I'm using Proton by Brent for PHP Storm, and my terminal is another story. I believe the terminal is inherited through what is in PHP Storm, I believe. Editor color scheme. That is the and the theme. No. Colors. Appearance. General. Appearance. Color scheme. Photon light. Which is a really good one by Brent, GD, light. Who's this dude? Look at his repositories. I'm going to drop it in as a comment then. Oh wait, I just saw it. Copy link. I'm going to drop this in here. Stick on the screen for you. This is the theme I am using. It's really nice, it's clean, and it's easy to look at. So if I now look at this vendor in Doctrine Migrations, acquire Doctrine Migrations.php, space Doctrine Migrations. So that is in Doctrine Migrations bin migration. So this is what we got. We're doing lots of cool stuff. Console runner, dependency factory. How could we possibly pull this in? Lib. Liberty lib. Because I mean, I don't want to rewrite everything, but I want a nice way to run some of this. I mean, I could use another Symfony package, Symfony process just to run it, but it seems like overkill. What I'd like to be able to do is just kind of, like Laravel does with PHP Artisan Migrate, I'd like to go micro do this. So, what could we do? We've got migrations current, so a configuration file. So you need to add config. Okay.
Okay, sweetie, stop drawing attention to it.
Okay, so I need to do some config stuff. Root of your project, I need to create migrations.php. So to do that, I can come here, new PHP file, migrations.php. Add some script types. Again, just going to return an array because we are using PHP and arrays solve all of our problems. So we need this basically. I'm going to copy that across and see what we're doing. Make sure we're happy with what's going on. Table name, Doctrine Migration versions. May as well keep it standard. Version column name, column length, executed at, execution time, migration paths, my project migrations. Migration paths, all or nothing, check database platform. Is that like meant to be a namespace, that first part? So here are details about what each configuration does. Migration paths, that is what I'm playing with now. So the PHP namespace your migration classes are located under, and the path to the directory where to look for migration classes. Okay, namespace. So drop that, we don't care about that. So we are going to keep this under infrastructure. We're going to keep this under database. This under migrations. In there, new, just to make sure that appears. So in our composer now, we can come to our auto load up here. That's how we're loading an app. And now we can load in infrastructure. It is going to be under source infrastructure. Okay, make sure that doesn't die. That is all good. And migration, so we can say infrastructure database migrations, and then that's a namespace your migration classes are located under, and where to look for migration classes. So we want our migrations to be kind of top level, much like Laravel, because it actually works quite nicely. So we'll set up database migrations. We're going to add another keep in there, and this is going to be current directory database migrations. And I hope this now works. migrationsdb.php does not exist. Okay, so where's that meant to be? All or nothing template, connection configuration. Okay, so you also need to create one of these. Oh, this is getting messy, isn't it? Laravel hides a lot of this away, which you do kind of appreciate. So we'll return that for now. And that's just going to keep all of that stuff in there. And for now, we're just going to say, okay, we're going to create a new one. We're going to call it micro root. And then database micro. Okay, so let's set, I don't know, HP online for now. No migrations executed yet. Perfect. So we can start working with our migrations. So for now, I'm just going to call it a day there, because the next part's going to go really in depth, and I've already been going for 2 hours, and I wouldn't mind chilling. Annotations. I'm not sure on annotations. I never liked them personally. There's a good question, Benjamin. They're very, you like them or you don't. I think they've got a purpose for some things, but I don't think it's an answer to all prayers. So there's migrations. I'm just going to push all of that up now. That is all pushed. This should all be up. So that is our stuff all done. So let's close all of those down. Don't need any of that right now. So micro, you can use micro. It's a template repository. You can use this template. Yeah, same does go for PHP 8 attributes. I'm not 100% sure of them yet. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, we did good. We did good. Then our core here, we've got an API response factory. Really simple, easy to use. This doesn't have too much going on. And micro itself, this has got some cool stuff going on. We're going to start adding in these sorts of things, which eventually read from .env. But we're getting there. And the key thing to remember with Laravel, well, not Laravel, it's Slim, and this in particular, is that it might feel like the long way around, but we refactor to a shorter step, which works perfectly for how we need it, instead of just adapting our workflow to suit Laravel or Symfony or any of the others. We're creating our own workflow based on what we've learned from others. Tonight in 2 hours, we've managed to connect to a database. We've managed to pull data through. We've set up some routes. We've added a command handler. We're starting to do that. We're starting to add database migrations. We're doing a lot more than what we thought we could do. And yeah, while Laravel would have given us a lot of that to begin with, we've got fine-grained control over each step, which sometimes you can't put a cost on. So with that being said, I'm going to drop this link in the comments one last time for anybody who might be interested. Feel free to have a look at that repo, fork it, play with it, submit a PR, do stuff while I'm not working on it and streaming. That would make my life easier. But I'll probably work on this again on Thursday. But for now, I will bid you adieu, good night, and see you next time.